Welcome to Swartz Shorts, the podcast all about the entrepreneurial ecosystem at Carnegie Mellon University and the larger Pittsburgh community.
Welcome back, everyone, to Swartz Shorts. Today, we are excited to have with us Arman Hezarkhani, founder and CEO of Parthean. Arman earned his degree in electrical and computer engineering from Carnegie Mellon University and interned at Google before founding his current company, Parthean. Parthean is a personal finance monitoring education app that helps consumers develop into better financial citizens, and earlier this year, they successfully raised $1.1 million in seed funding. Arman, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great to see you guys.
Thanks for coming on. Yeah, happy to have the chance to get to talk to you.
Arman, so what I'd like to kind of dig into first is, give us just a brief overview of what you guys are doing right now and how you guys help people manage their finances better.
Yeah. So again, thanks for having me. Always excited to kind of plug back into the Carnegie Mellon Pittsburgh ecosystems. So basically what we're doing is trying to solve the epidemic of financial illiteracy in the United States. 76% of young adults in America literally don't know the basics of how to manage their budgets, their credit cards, these very, very basic financial literacy topics. And in 2020, that cost us $435 billion. Last year, it cost us over $300 billion, right? So this is costing us a lot of money. And that's on an individual basis, right? Thousands of dollars per person that we can save or make by just knowing finance. And there's a lot of, you can Google any of these topics. And if you're savvy enough, you can find the proper information. But the issue is that it's really, really difficult actually for a novice to find that, even though the information's out there. It's really, really boring. So it's like these blog posts written in incredibly in-depth jargon, right? And so it's really, really difficult to get through. And then the last part is that it's not hands-on, right? So the loop is not closed. I can read about an IRA, but no one's going to teach me how to set it up properly for myself, right? And so what we're doing is we build these incredibly bite-sized learning modules that have completion rates 10 times leading edtech platforms. We build finance tools in the app that help us measure completion and help us close the loop. And then that also helps us personalize what you're going to learn next.
Yeah, I've been on, the internet myself, and I feel like some of the topics are so opaque and kind of hard to approach. And I know like Investopedia, things like that's a great resource, but you go on their pages and sometimes it feels like you need a finance background or something to like just understand, or you need a glossary of terms or something just to get through a single article.
Right. That's the thing. And often it's when we need it the most, right? We're really anxious. We don't know what we're doing. And that causes a lot of stress, right? So people ask us who are our competitors. And I agree that Investopedia, NerdWallet, all these blogs, they're great. I have no issue, but that's a very Web 1 solution, right? And so what we're trying to do is build a more Gen Z millennial product that has not been put out yet.
Yeah, so kind of going back into your history a little bit, where did this come from, this sort of interest in education and finance, and how did you kind of stumble upon that and turn it into like this passion for the company you're building?
Yeah. So for me, the education thing has kind of been a lifelong passion. So it started when I was a kid. My parents are both born and raised in Iran. I used to spend summers there and grew up on Long Island. And as you can imagine, the differences in everything between Long Island, New York, and Iran are huge, right? The economic differences, the socio-political differences in freedoms, all of these things, incredibly different. And I think like a lot of other immigrants or children of immigrants, that kind of made me feel like I had a duty to help other people have these improvements that my parents gave me, right? And anytime you talk to somebody who is either first gen or around that, right? They have this same sense of like, holy, I need to like help everybody else, right? It's like this God complex, if you will. But for me, I went through it like in a very analytical way, starting in high school. So I was thinking, okay, I want to help people. And I've been giving away, like, every time I'd get a gift for my birthday, if it was like $50, I'd give it to charity. And I did the math and I was like, this is not going to work. It's not going to make a dent, it's not scalable. It's not a very scalable solution. And I kind of did a first principles kind of view at this. And what I decided in high school, which I still believe, is that if I want to help other people solve any problem, or if I want to help people solve their own problems or anything, the root issue is education. It is poor quality of education. It's access to education. It's like every part of education is broken. And so that was like my core thesis. The second part was that I think that we need to build really strong incentive structures around this education because the economics of education are broken. So it needs to be a for-profit entrepreneurial endeavor. And then the last part is that it needs to be scalable, right? So that's where the tech comes in. And like, I wrote this in high school as like my college essay, and I submitted this to colleges. And since then I've been working on it. So when I was at Google, I was working on education there twice. I started my first edtech startup my freshman year, brought it through Alpha Lab. I started a consulting firm my junior year where I was working with the biggest teams at Fortune 500 companies, helping them develop curriculum. I taught in high school. I taught at CMU. Like, I did a lot of this work in education across the board. And then during COVID, we saw a ton of interest in finance, right? Like, everyone started investing. It was a bull market and everyone felt like they were missing out. And I noticed that there was a gap where we had fintech on the rise, where new asset classes were being made available to you and I, where previously they would not be available, right? Like, it's really hard for people to buy homes, but I can use fractional real estate apps to buy a part of a home, right? That wasn't a thing. But also, the knowledge is still not there, right? And so I noticed like this gap, and that's what Parthian's filling.
Yeah, so I think that's really, sort of noble of you, and also, so universal. Education and providing education to people so that they can better their lives is a really powerful thing. But at the same time, like, education's it's hard, it's something
Absolutely.
that, especially because you need so much sort of intrinsic motivation a lot of times to go after education and learn about something. And, how are you guys kind of trying to address that with the app, not just being another sort of tool for people to learn, or, another blog for people to learn, but like, how are you actually trying to build on those motivations for people?
Yeah. That is like that arc that you just went through is where every single edtech founder fails, is because every person who starts an edtech founder believes the best in the world. They think that everyone wants to learn and like they're going to save the world through education. And then they face that problem. They have awful engagement. And then the company either fails or has to pivot or whatever, right? And so that engagement problem is core. And with massive open online courses, right? The Udemy, Coursera, these first, I call that like the EdTech one wave. They, by impact measures, have largely not been successful. They have single-digit completion rates. They've not changed the world in the way that we all hoped, right? Because they're just posting videos online. And to your point, we're relying on the users to have that motivation to complete, right? Now there's like this new wave of EdTech that is basically we're admitting to ourselves that is the case. And there's like a bunch of different ways that people are attacking this. So Duolingo, for example, Louis Von Ahn always talks about the fact that that like most of academic research around education does not work for what we're trying to do, because it assumes that a student is being held hostage in a classroom, right? And so they use gamification and fun and jokes and Duo the Owl to keep people engaged, right? There's cohort-based courses nowadays, which use accountability and actually having somebody hold you accountable on Zoom. They're using that to basically increase completion. What we're doing is we're trying to basically find the waves of interest and curiosity and lean into those, right? And what I mean by that is that there are moments in our life when we have that desire and we have that drive, but they're not constant, right? So for example, right now, if I say on this podcast, who wants to learn about budgeting, right? Most people will say, I don't want to learn about budgeting right now. But the people who will want to learn about budgeting are the ones who went out to the bars last weekend and have spent this entire week with a low budget in their checking account and haven't been able to buy lunch, right? Those are the people, because they overspent and now budgeting is incredibly relevant to them, right?
Yeah.
And on Parthian, we have that information because we're building the full personal finance monitoring tools, right? So based on those trends, we can make recommendations and say, hey, we noticed you went out. We hope it was fun, but now let's learn about budgeting, right? That's kind of our approach.
Yeah. No, I love that too. Shout out. I love that you shouted out Duolingo, because we're actually the studio.
Huge shout out to Duolingo.
The studio we're in is like across the street from Duolingo's office in Pittsburgh. So I think it's a perfect tie-in. Yeah.
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 Let's get them on the pod.
Yeah.
That's the goal. There's two things you talked about that I've been thinking on for a second. So the first is you talked about closing the loop. And that also ties back into how you discussed a lot of education is broken. A lot of people either don't want to learn or aren't actively engaged, even when they're being locked in the classroom. So when you look at how people learn right now, it's you go through your course, you get the books, you take the test, and then you brain dump everything. People immediately forget everything they learned, and they're like, oh, glad I'm done learning that. And you don't have this real life application to the things that you're learning. And when you think about moving from the read and learn to read and engage and learn that you're seeing with MOOCs to where the future of education is heading, what position are you taking in terms of how do you get people to be actively engaged? How do you get them to take this thing that they're learning and while they're learning it, apply it into their life so that it sticks and so that it has a lasting impact?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit it on the head with the current model, which is, like you said, you learn and then you take an assessment and then you have learned it and you are now forever, this thing, right? And as someone who took Physics 1 my freshman year of college many years ago, I don't remember anything about that class, even though I probably got a pretty good grade in it, right? So that model is fundamentally broken, right? My knowledge on that topic was very high and then it went down, right? What's interesting is, I'll use my budgeting example, right? Let's say I went out last weekend, right? I went over budget. I spent way more than I should have. I learned budgeting right now, right? I design a budget, and then for the next week, I stay on budget. The following week, I stay on budget. This whole month, I stay on budget. My knowledge is still pretty high. And then I go out and I break that habit, right? Clearly, I need a refresher. So then we ping you again. Hey, do you remember your budget? Like, here's the module if you want to revisit it. We're sure you still remember, but let's just stick to this, right? And so because we're seeing their activity and we're seeing their display of that knowledge, we can refresh whenever they need it, right? And optimally, we're not being reactive. We're not saying, hey, you just went out again, you spent $1,000 or whatever. Instead of that, we say, hey, it's been a month since you last checked this out. You've been on track, but we just want to remind you of these top 3 things, right? And there's a pretty wide display of research that if you do, it's called spaced repetition, right? So if I teach you something today, I teach it to you again in a month, I teach it to you again in 2 months after that. And then if I continue to space that out, it typically will stay fresh. But what's interesting is that we don't need to give you a quiz to make sure of it, right? We can just watch your behavior. And so it would be basically like, let's say you're an engineer, you take that physics class, and then you continue to submit all of your engineering work that you're doing on the job to that same physics professor forever, right? That's the equivalent, which of course doesn't work with traditional education, but on Parthian, it's native to the platform.
Yeah, I love that. It's something that's so, when you're taking a test, there's sort of strategies you can use to take the test, and you're almost like learning the material in order to take the test rather than apply it or actually use it in any meaningful fashion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wanted to pivot kind of quickly to talking about, you guys just raised a pretty sizable seed round. Congrats on that.
Thank you.
When you were going through that process and navigating, raising money like that, what were you kind of looking for in those partnerships, and how is that going to help Parthean sort of in this next step?
Yeah, so I specifically, and I would tell every investor this, it was almost one of the first things that I would tell them. I'm looking for three things out of our investors. The first is capital, and that's not just capital today. That is our next round of funding. I either am looking for people who not even can necessarily follow on or lead that round, but can introduce me to other capital partners for that round, right? The second thing, which I think is the most important thing, is aligned vision, right? Like, for example, right now, I've spent several minutes kind of painting a picture of how I see the world. Our investors need to agree with that, not fully agree with every part of it, but that should be a world that they want to see, right? One of my favorite investors on the cap table, I like after the pitch, he was like, this world that you've just painted, I don't know if it's going to work. I feel confident that your plan makes sense, but it's a world that I want to live in, right? And then after a couple meetings, right, he's been one of the most incredible investors on the cap table. So that aligned vision, that like, I want this to work so badly, I will introduce you to everyone. I'll stay up late at night on the phone with you, talking through strategies, all those things. That's really, really important. And then the third thing is people who can fill in the holes on our team, right? Like, I know that I'm pretty good at certain things and I'm pretty bad at other things. And I think it's important for a founder to know what they're good at and what they're bad at, and have people around them that can remind them of those things, right? And I think I made a list literally of like what I'm good at, what I'm bad at, and that I will not share with you. And I was specifically looking for investors who have skills that I don't, who have connections that I don't, who have access to things and skills and whatever that I don't. And so that's one of the things that I'm happiest about, is that we have this like army of investors that are really passionate, that can help us raise in the future and round me out,
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And then kind of thinking from the perspective of our community here, CMU community and some of our viewers and listeners, what do you guys, how can we help? What are some things that you're working on that, you might look for help from people on?
Yeah. So actually we are opening up our private beta. It's still going to be private, but like we're onboarding people to our private beta for our full subscription starting next week. And so we're looking for people who we're booked for like a few weeks, but we're looking for people who afterwards can join that private beta and kind of help us learn what they want and optimize the product for all these people. And there are some other opportunities. I'll mention this one. So we're working with a few companies and universities to go in and kind of give personal finance talks to those partners. And so if there are any students who want to learn about personal finance and they have an organization on campus or a professor that they think would be down to work with us, we'd be happy to come in and give a talk about personal finance. And especially through this downturn right now, or potential downturn, this is not investment advice. No one can tell what's happening. But especially right now when people are stressed about discussion about a downturn, we found that people are looking to us to kind of guide them through that and specifically give them the knowledge and the education that they need to navigate through that. And so that's kind of who we're looking for, people who are looking for that guidance.
I don't know about Brian, but I'm pretty interested in that private beta. So maybe I'll shoot you an email after this and
I don't need email reminders after a long night out. I'm like, I don't need an app to tell me to spend too much money.
Awesome. Well,
I'll personally text you if you want. That'll be a side thing, just you and me.
Yeah. Well, if you're back in the Pittsburgh area at all, that we'd love to have you come by, and we can hang out and we'll budget in a little bit of extra, beer money or something, so we can hang out.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah, I'll be back in a couple months, and if you guys are ever in New York, let me know.
Yeah,
I know some great places to get budget beers.
Will do. Well, Arman, it was great having you. Thanks so much for joining us today. And yeah, we will see you guys next time on Sorts.